Hello and welcome back to the Video Essay Podcast, a show featuring conversations with leading critics, scholars, filmmakers, and other creators of videographic criticism. I'm your host, Will DeGravio, and on today's show, you will be listening to audio from Seen and Heard, selections from the Black Lives Matter Video Essay playlist. As listeners will know, I have spent the last 5 or 6 months or so co-curating the Black Lives Matter Video Essay playlist with Kevin B. Lee and Sydney Wild Harris. You can find the playlist at thevideoessay.com/Black Lives Matter. In the course of curating the playlist, this truly wonderful opportunity came up to partner with the Open City Documentary Festival, which is a London-based film festival. And they reached out and wanted to, as the name of the event suggests, screen some selections from the Black Lives Matter Video Essay playlist. The festival event was held last month, and all of the proceeds for the event were donated to Black Minds Matter UK. So right up front, the first thing that I would ask listeners to do, if you are able, is to please consider making a donation in any amount to Black Minds Matter UK. I will link to them on our website, thevideoessay.com. And the reason I'm asking to do that is because, it seems like we should follow in the spirit of the festival event where all proceeds were donated to Black Minds Matter UK. And I am very much grateful to the Open City Documentary Festival for allowing me to borrow the audio for this podcast. They really were just so fantastic to work with, did all the logistical legwork, booked all the guests, did all that. So this really was very little work for me to put this podcast episode together. So I am super grateful to them. And in the spirit of that collaboration, in the spirit of everything that the Black Lives Matter Video Essay playlist is trying to do, I would urge people to please consider a donation to Black Minds Matter UK. And again, I will include a link on our website, thevideoessay.com. At the event, Kevin, Sydney, and I acted as sort of co-moderators of a panel which featured 4 truly wonderful guests, artists, video essayists, one of whom was Sydney herself. So at the festival, we screened a wide range of videos from the playlist. We screened Sydney's Cotton, The Fabric of Genocide, the video essay I Feel, Therefore I Can Be Free by Nzinga Kendall. We screened New Forms of Racism in the Post-Cinematic Dispositif by Jace Alexander Casey, Unlocked by Jasmine Jones, Get Out, A New Perspective in Horror, which is by Michael Tucker and the Lessons from the Screenplay team. And we also screened Real Talk, Is BreadTube Discussing Race Right by Professor Flowers on YouTube, whose name is Claire. And we were very fortunate at the festival to be joined by Sydney, of course, and also Nzinga, Jasmine, and Claire for a really great conversation about their videos, about their work, about their practices. And so that is what this audio is. Now, of course, at the event itself, we actually screened the videos. So what I've done is I've tried to edit together the audio from the event. I took out the audio from the videos, and instead I just inserted a little bit of elevator music to give you kind of some transition, to make the transitions kind of seem more organic. The way that I imagine this episode being structured is that after each little block and segment, you will hit pause, go watch the videos online. I will link to all of them at thevideoessay.com. Watch the videos in question and then go back to the podcast and continue listening. If that sounded confusing, it will make sense once you start listening to the show. But again, there'll be a little guide on how to listen to this event at thevideoessay.com. Before I leave you to the live event, I just want to extend a big thank you, of course, to Sydney and Kevin. It's just been an amazing experience being able to collaborate with them on this, and I learned so much from them in this process. Thank you to the team at Open City. They are fantastic. You should learn more about the festival at opencitylondon.com. There's all sorts of amazing, cool stuff that they're doing all the time. Be sure to follow them on social media as well. And a big thanks also to Nzinga, Jasmine, and Claire, Professor Flowers, for joining us live and for allowing us to screen your work. We really appreciate it, and it was such a thrill to get to talk to you all live. So without further ado, here is Seen and Heard, selections from the Black Lives Matter Video Essay playlist.
Everybody, and welcome to the 10th edition of Open City Documentary Festival. My name's Chloe Trainer, I'm the festival director, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you to day 4 of this year's online festival. This year's festival runs till the 15th of September. You can find all the details at our website, which is opencitylondon.com. Tonight's event is part of our special events program, and we're really excited that we have people watching at home from all around the world, which is one upside of doing an online festival. And we've got some incredible people also joining for the event from everywhere. So yeah, we're really excited to be doing this. I just wanted to say a huge thank you to Kevin, Sydney, and Will for bringing this project to us. When they first approached us, we knew that we were really keen to do anything that we could to kind of support this project and create space for this conversation. So huge thank you to them. So yeah, tonight's event is Seen and Heard, selections from the Black Lives Matter video essay playlist. I just want to say a few housekeeping things at the top, and then I will hand over to the co-curators of the playlist, because this is really their show. But just quickly, since you're all watching on Vimeo live stream at home, there will be time for audience questions. You can send them to us at any point throughout the event. You can just email them to questions@opencitylondon.com. The details should be just below the video player as well if you need to copy and paste. And also the ticket sales for this event are being donated to Black Minds Matter UK, who connect Black individuals and families with free professional mental health services in the UK. So thank you for supporting them through coming to this event, and I encourage you to check out their work and support in any way that you can. So yeah, I'm going to go away now, and I'm going to hand over to Kevin, Sydney, and Will. Thank you so much for watching.
Thank you so much, Chloe. Really appreciate that you gave us the platform to share this work and to also invite voices and creators who are involved in producing this work for this evening. Hi, everybody. I'm Kevin, and along with Sydney and Will, we are the co-curators of the Black Lives Matter video essay playlist. Not to belabor it, but just to give a bit of background into how this came about. It was really around the end of May with the death of George Floyd at the hands of the Minneapolis police, and just the outrageousness of that, of witnessing that, and then the protests that swept across the United States and across the world that followed. Watching this while I was quarantining in Germany, I just sort of felt this need to figure out what role I could play, or what I could lend based on my own background and my own interests. I've been making video essays for over a decade, and so that's something I know very well. And video essays for me personally have always been something that can shed light on any given topic, especially through raising an awareness of how media is being used and the role that media plays in informing and communicating topics of all kinds. And so I was just kind of curious what role media could play in helping us come to terms with the injustice treated on Black lives and the Black Lives Matter movement. And I thought, who else could I connect with to engage in this kind of this enterprise, this project? And one of the first people that came to mind was Will DeGravio, because he has really shown a lot of initiative in just the last year or so with his project, the Video Essay Podcasts, which is a fantastic website I encourage you to check out. And that actually is the site of the Black Lives Matter playlist. Is where you can find the selections that we made. So Will, maybe you can say a bit about what attracted you to the project and how you engaged with it.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you, Kevin, and thank you everyone for being here today. As Kevin mentioned, I was really quite flattered when Kevin reached out to me. And also I was feeling a lot of the same things that Kevin was feeling. I was in the United States. I had left actually the UK in March due to coronavirus, and was home and watching a lot of videos and watching, all the protests and everything at home. And as Kevin mentioned, in the last year or so, I've started this podcast. I've been trying to figure out the space that I occupy in the video essay world. Though I make videos myself, they're nothing of the caliber that you'll see here today. And that's not really my main focus. I'm I'm primarily interested in video essay curation and talking to people about their work and really trying to highlight the work of others and try to figure out what a video essay is, what people are out there working on, because I think and I'm particularly interested in video essay in an academic context, which has been a growing movement in the last, I'd say, 5 or 6 years or so, championed by people like Kevin. So when Kevin reached out to me, I jumped at the opportunity to kind of use the platform that I've been trying to get to grow to try and find this work. One thing that was really important to us when we did this list, and that I should really be noted from the top, is that this list, 90% of it maybe was crowdsourced from other people. And that was really important. While all 3 of us added videos to the list, which you can find at thevideoessay.com/Black Lives Matter if you want to see the full list. We were really looking for people to kind of send in their videos that they've watched and really find all different types of videos at every corner of the internet that we could find to kind of all gather on this one list. And so for me, I felt like the way I could contribute was having this platform already available to people to try and help build community around the list and to crowdsource the videos that were on it. So I was very grateful to be asked to be a part of it. And Kevin and I knew that we needed another collaborator to do this. And Sydney was the first person I thought of. Sydney and I had actually never even really met before. But on the first episode of the podcast, Catherine Grant, to anyone familiar with video essay work will know Katie. She was my first guest. And on the podcast, I asked the guest to discuss a work made by someone else. And we discussed Sydney's video essay, Caught in the Fabric of Genocide, which we'll be watching shortly. And Sydney's absolutely one of the best video essayists working today generally, but also as it comes to some of the issues that the playlist itself's covered. So Sydney was kind of the no-brainer third partner. And I feel in many ways like the third wheel with Kevin and Sydney, who've really done just an amazing job. So Sydney, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Will. Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, everyone, for being here. My name is Sydney Wild Harris. I'm a film scholar and video essayist. And as Will said, I was reached out to get involved about the playlist. When the current protests began, I was actually finishing a video essay here at my apartment in Atlanta. And so I was immediately drawn to the project when it was brought to me. As Will said, and as Kevin has said as well, this just felt like something that we could do within our own field to highlight the movement and highlight the work that could best support the movement, and to also help to best find solutions and also see how people are responding in kind to everything that's been happening around us. So that's how I was involved. Will effectively slid in my DMs on Twitter, but we hadn't met yet. We were familiar with each other, but we hadn't officially met yet. So I was really just humbled and grateful to be a part of this project. It's been a really insightful summer.
So Sydney has the distinction of being not just a curator, but also having her own work represented. And it's fantastic work, and we're going to see it in a moment. Work that can be defined as videographic film scholarship. So that is a particular kind of video essay that we'll be discussing after we see these first examples. Another example being I Feel, Therefore I Can Be Free by Professor Nzinga Kendall, who is with us. And so we'll see that video. And then Sydney and Nzinga will have a conversation about what the videographic film scholarship version of video essays are. One thing that we discovered in the course of doing this project and just encountering hundreds of videos was that to kind of give shape to this enormous playlist, we had to kind of start assigning a kind of topology or context, ways of kind of seeing video essays in different contexts, addressed to different audiences, with different relationships to found footage and using media to make critical commentary. But they all are related to the issues brought up by the Black Lives Matter movement. So we'll be seeing video essays that we found on YouTube, academic video essays, video art, and social media, which we'll actually kick things off with this video called BLM Avengers. And as you watch this, the question may come to your mind, how is this exactly a video essay? And that is definitely something we can discuss. So we look forward to your questions and comments. Please give feedback in the chat, and we'll be happy to discuss further. But for now, we'll watch the first set of videos.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back. Hope everyone enjoyed that first selection of the screenings. We're going to jump back to the BLM Avengers video later in the program. But for now, we're joined with Nzinga Kendall and Sydney Wild-Harris in her role as video essayist, not as co-curator. Before I begin, as Kevin mentioned, the video essay playlist is divided into 5 categories, and then there's also a 6th further viewing section of videos that we received, but that didn't quite fit the parameters of the list. And both Nzinga and Sydney's videos are in the videographic criticism and scholarship section of the list. So just very quickly, for those who may not be familiar, many film and media scholars in recent years, I'd say, particularly in the past 5 to 6 years, have been turning to video essays and videographic criticism in their own work and as a form of scholarship. For example, Nzinga's piece was actually published in the academic journal In Transition, which was founded in 2014. And it is peer reviewed. You can go online to mediacommons.org/intransition and read some writing that Nzinga has published about the piece. But just a little bit of context there. So the way this is going to go is I'm going to ask Sydney a couple of questions about her piece, and then Sydney will ask Nzinga a couple questions, and then maybe Kevin and I will also throw in a question or two in the mix. But first, Sydney, Cotton, the Fabric of Genocide. One of my favorite video essayists. Video essay is one of my favorite video essayists. My first question, this is something that we've talked about before, and I really loved our discussion about it, so I figured we'd share it with everyone, is the tone of the piece. Because in a way, it strikes an interesting balance, because on one hand, the video, The Old South, is a super effed up video. And in a way, you're highlighting how racist and awful that short film is, but you're also really poking fun at it in a way, because it is also on the surface level super ridiculous. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about your relationship to that short film, kind of how you came to find it, and also how you struck that tone in the piece as well. And I guess if you agree with my summary of the tone.
Thank you, Will. Thank you for your compliments. So you are correct in your reading that. I viewed The Old South, the short film directed by Fred Zinnemann in 1938, as pretty absurd in its depiction of slavery in the cotton industry in the American South. But how I was first introduced to the short film was in class. When in about 2017, which is when I first created Cotton, was in a class that was centered around melodrama and film history. And we were showed The Old South as context to how the film Gone with the Wind was marketed towards American audiences a year before it came out. And the film has almost been like lost to history outside of maybe special features commentaries, on box sets of Gone with the Wind. But we watched it, we screened it in class, and I was just struck by how often the narrator uses the word cotton, and how the story of the piece attempts to rewrite history, and the history of the Civil War, as well as the history of slavery in America, by presupposing that cotton was the reason that we fought the Civil War, and economic reasons that aren't related to human lives are the reason that the Civil War was fought. I found all of that absurd, and also so much of the visuals, given especially like our present historical context, I think really aid in an absurdist reading of this film from 1938 that was literally only created as promotion to Gone with the Wind, to get film audiences excited to see the film that would be coming out the following year. So in hearing the word cotton repeated over and over again, and by how the short film tries to recontextualize the word cotton, I couldn't, in my first watch of the short film, I couldn't help but have my brain like conjure images of those cotton commercials from the 90s specifically. That's all I could really see. Is every time he said cotton, all I could do is finish the thought with the cotton, the fabric of our lives. So for me, it always kind of played funny. And when I decided to pursue it as a video essay project, I think the tone, I think the absurdist tone fits the absurdist tone of racism itself. And also my sense of humor. So that was really how Cotton was born. And I've been really excited to see how it's been received by audiences and how that almost humor has been received. Thank you.
Absolutely. And one of the, actually, I'll steal this phrase from Nzinga, because in reading your little essay in Transition, you write that in your essay, you want people to feel their way through it. And I actually feel that as well in Sydney's piece. So Sydney, in asking you that, there's what I'd say is kind of I think when a lot of people think of the word video essay, they might think of a video ed that we'll see later in the program, which is from Lessons from the Screenplay, where there's a voiceover and there's a script and things like that. And your video essay is not that. And it's very minimalist in that way. And that I think it really lets the short film really just kind of breathe, and you get to really experience it and just kind of be overcome with the images. And I'm wondering, what made you kind of choose that kind of format for the piece? Like, did you think of having a voiceover or something like that? Or was it always just, I'm going to just kind of roll with this short little piece and kind of let everything kind of speak for itself?
Mm-hmm. Well, initially, this is one of the first video essays I ever created. And again, I created it for a class, for a grade. So really what I wanted, and also there were parameters, there was a rubric around that assignment. So I was applying a specific academic framework to the piece itself, which in this case was Bell Hook's Oppositional Gaze. So the minimalist aesthetic for me, really what I wanted to do was to bring emphasis to the original piece, to the Old South, and also simultaneously subvert it by intercutting clips of images of slavery and cotton throughout film history, just to kind of immediately cut at the images that we have just seen. And also, I think to really highlight the commercial aspect of Zinnemann's piece itself, because ultimately that's what it is. It's a commercial. It's a long-form commercial for Gone with the Wind. So I really wanted to stick to letting the images speak for themselves. And I also feel like just because it was one of the first pieces I ever created, I was honestly nervous as a young film scholar about how to infuse my voice audibly. And I feel that I was probably empowered by the experience of having to communicate my ideas through a visual medium as opposed to actually using voiceover, which is something that I would like to do now. But at the time, it was a means of helping me to, one, find my voice, my academic voice, and also to really play with the idea of if my voice would be received and would be validated within film studies. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for that. Well, just for the sake of time, maybe if we have extra time, I have more questions and we can come back to your piece, but maybe perhaps it'd be good for you to turn to talking with Nzinga. Thank you.
Nzinga, thank you so much for being with us. I loved your piece the first time I saw it, and again, over and over. My question for you, my first question would really pertain to the conversation that you talk about taking place within your video essay. So in your own words, I feel, therefore, I Can Be Free employs the work of three Afro-Caribbean feminists, Sarah Gomez, Audre Lorde, and Sylvia Wynter, to engage in a conversation about Sarah Gomez's film. One aspect I really marveled at was how there were, in fact, 4 Black women's voices, the fourth, of course, being your own, and how you use your own voice to reorient the audience's understanding of both the film and its protagonist, Yolanda. I'm curious as to the impetus of this dialogue. Did you first view the film and then learn about the details of the production later? How were you first introduced to De Cierta, and when did you invite Lorde and Wynter to the conversation?
First of all, I'd just like to say thank you to all of you for inviting me to be part of this conversation. It's really, your question is it's like speaking to me very deeply, because I saw, you were talking about this assignment for making cotton as an assignment, and I saw De Cierta Manera for the first time when I was in undergrad in a Cuban cinema class. So the film has stuck with me ever since, because, thinking about a Black woman making films in revolutionary Cuba was like mind-blowing. And I wrote a paper about that film and was thinking through kind of like color politics, because there are issues between mulattoes and, I'll say mulattoes because it's like in Spanish, and I guess in English that term isn't favored anymore. But anyway, all of that to say, I am someone with roots in the Caribbean, and I think it's really important when we're thinking about Blackness, how it extends beyond the US. And that's why thinking about Lorde and Winter and Gomez together in conversation, it really made sense to me as Black women who also have ties to the Caribbean. So that's kind of a brief-ish way to explain why and how. Yeah.
Yeah, I completely understand. I was really interested in how your video essay uses sound, but specifically silence, and silence that almost reads as quietness as opposed to silence. And I feel like it really deftly invites the audience to not necessarily get uncomfortable, but to reach for the same vulnerability that the piece brings up. So I was curious as to what your decision was in how you edited the sound and your decision to include so much silence and quietness throughout the piece. And how do you feel sound specifically works throughout?
Well, so this was also an exercise, right, for the video camp at Middlebury. And that's where I was introduced to video essay as a form of scholarly critique. And it's really exciting for me because it allows, us to use the audiovisual form to engage with audiovisual forms, right? And that is super exciting because of the ways that you can manipulate the sound and image, right? And that was something that was encouraged at the video camp, to really play around with the films that we were looking at and researching, so that in that technological process, we might actually see the films and listen to the films a different way. And so that was something I really felt the freedom to do, things like techniques like layer on my own voice, but also incorporate moments from the film soundtrack at key points during the video essay. But I was also really guided by Audre Lorde's The Transformation of Silence into Language and Action, right? And thinking about how, as Black women, we sometimes silence ourselves, but that lends itself to like our continued oppression. So what happens even in the video essay when we start from a kind of silence from the film, there's my voice at the beginning to kind of guide us into the essay, but the essay is very quiet. And then at the end, you kind of hear the voices of Yolanda and Mario. And that was, in a way, a kind of tribute to this idea of like what happens when we move from like these gestures and the looks to spoken dialogue. So, yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. We're running up against the clock here for this segment, but thank you very much, Nzenga and Sydney. And just a quick reminder, we are taking questions at the end and would love to be emailed them throughout. So if you wouldn't mind emailing questions at opencitylondon.com. Again, that's questions at opencitylondon.com. Thank you so much, Nzinga and Sydney. Really appreciate it.
I guess I'll say a brief comment about the BLM Avengers video, which was originally posted on Twitter and then went viral. Not to say too much about it because the author is not here with us, but maybe the question came to mind among our audience, like, is this a video essay or not? But I think something that Nzinga had just said about the video essay could help justify how this BLM Avengers video could function as a video essay, because Nzinga, you said, you were really struck by how video essay allows us to use audiovisual media to reflect on itself, to allow us to reflect on it and allow the video itself to become reflective. And I think this is, in the academic parlance, this is called videographic criticism. And yeah, this type of critical repurposing, I think, is really evident in this BLM Avengers video, and it's definitely the quality that I look for in a video essay. I mean, the term video essay is being used very broadly these days. You see it applied everywhere, and if someone basically is reading an essay aloud on camera, I guess technically you could call that a video essay. But this point about critical repurposing in a way that is reflective and resourceful, I find very powerful, if not political. And what Sydney just said about how when she was watching this short film and this alternative movie started to play in her mind, and how she's able to resourcefully collect and reorganize and remobilize that media to make her own point and express her own vision. That is exactly the type of video essay that I'm interested in. I believe has this tremendous power, especially within the context of Black Lives Matter. So anyway, so that was my justification for why BLM Avengers belongs in the playlist. And I guess now we'll have a look at two more examples. One from the Videographic Scholarship kind of corner of the video essay cinematic universe. New Forms of Racism in the Post-Cinematic Dispositif by Jace Alexander Casey, who unfortunately couldn't join us today. And then Unlocked by Jasmine Jones, which I think could be termed video art, although it is primarily found online, and is using, I think it's using YouTube videos. And Jasmine is with us, so we'll get to talk to her a bit about what she thinks about the term video essay applied to her work. So let's take a look at those two short films. So now we have Jasmine Jones with us, and with her work Unlocked is kind of directing us more in the realm of video art, although I don't want to assume or impose any labels on you, Jasmine, so you can clap back if you want. But yeah, it's definitely in a different register than the works we've been seeing till now. And I guess the natural question is just, what is this footage that you're using? Where does it come from? And how did you come up, how did you develop your take on it? I'll just say that, I think the theme of appropriation is very much in play here, because there's, acts of cultural appropriation that are being depicted within the, or is it de-appropriation? I mean, you would know best. And then your video is appropriating these videos, which gets us thinking about how video essays are themselves works of appropriation, critical appropriation, at least in their best manifestation. So this theme of appropriation is very strong here. But anyway, tell us about how this video came about.
Thank you. I appreciate you kind of articulating the parallels of appropriation. I haven't put words to that, but true. I think, and whether or not this is a video essay, it's like, I leave that to the viewer. Labels, I love vague things because I feel like you can slip into more places when people don't know quite what it is. So if this is a video essay enough to pass in this context, this is great. But yeah, the video. So yeah, I'm perpetually working on this film. I'm someone who followed a lot of YouTube creators and learned how to do like my hair on YouTube. Like, shouts out to Black femmes on YouTube who really, I feel like, educated many folks on many things. I can do a lot through that. And I, over the past like 5 or 6 years, have followed these different Black content creators and really seen them evolve, seen them kind of disappear, come back. And I noticed this trend of the apology video, and like this kind of tendency, this theme of like people being like, guys, I'm so sorry, or like, and then like I followed long enough to notice the trend of the apology video. So then people being like, I know I've said this before, and like some of them are really humorous. And some of them are like, you know, I don't owe you guys anything. And some of them are really like struck a chord within me because of people feeling like, these Black femmes feeling like they owe us this free content, and alluding to, you know, different life circumstances happening and mental health things and like all of the reasons that get in the way of you, you know, engaging on a social platform. So that's a project I've been interested in, but have faced a lot of ethical like things around, one, what does it mean to be like, you know, working off of YouTube videos? And I think in the past I've edited videos, and this video, Unlocked, is one where I'll appropriate content and kind of not ask for permission depending on what it is I'm doing. But with this, where it's people's apologies, that just felt like I just needed a different process. And also the research was extremely heavy because you're watching YouTube videos, 20-minute long YouTube videos, sometimes with people crying about all of this stuff that's happened in their life. And so it was really heavy. And somehow through like the suggested videos playlist, like a tangent, like for me, like a palate cleanser, a YouTube palate cleanser was watching white people cut off their dreadlocks. And like, that's, you know, there are videos, and it's also, and so I started thinking like, this is hilarious. Like, this is healing in and of itself. And then I encountered probably, I'm trying to think, the first video in Unlocked with the Black woman and the white man who are cutting the locks. And I was like, oh my God, this is like a whole different level of satisfying when you see a Black person doing it. And so then I kind of took this, like, I had a mission of watching every white person who cut off their locks and trying to see in the background who was around. And ultimately, I was only able to source these 2 videos and one video has 2 different Black people in them. But yeah, and so then it's just a matter of zooming in. It's a matter of like trying to reframe so that we're really focusing on the pleasure and the experience that the Black femmes are having in this film, and kind of trying to frame out the white people, because the videos are very much like, I'm cutting off my dreadlocks. Like, it's all centering these white folks in the video. So I also felt better about appropriating it without any permission, because it's just, you know, I didn't have a lot of respect for the original creators. But I did read like the special thanks at the end of the video. That's me guessing. In the captions of their YouTube videos, they kind of name the people who aren't in it and be like, I'm hanging out with this person. So that's me kind of guessing what the first names of these folks are that are in the video. And there's an additional backstory there's a whole additional backstory around the dedication and like the life that this film has taken since then, but that's kind of just the gist of it. Oh, and then the affirmations are by a YouTube content creator, the Hood Hippie, and I specifically was seeking out affirmations for Black femmes, and ideally from somebody who had locks, because I felt like that was a voice that was more interesting and appropriate than like mine. I've never had locks. So yeah, the Hood Hippies was like a really perfect fit, and I did get consent from them, and they were super on board, so that was cool.
Okay, so it wasn't commissioned for the video, it was something that you found.
Yeah, they had their own video. I can't remember what the background was, but I reached out on Instagram, and they were pretty responsive. I told them what I was doing, and so yeah, they were down with that. So I did want to make sure if I'm using someone's voice, but they would be in the loop.
Well, I really, just listening to this, I really love just how engaged you are with all the different things happening with internet culture, with YouTube, just so aware and so engaged, and yet not subscribing completely to the logic, questioning it, pushing back, figuring out your own position, which I think defines you more as an artist than a YouTube content creator, shall we say. But I think this video is but the thing is, this video is available online. I think, correct me if I'm mistaken, that, although you are a video artist, or at least I see you as such, it's not like you put this in an exclusive gallery space or exhibition space first. You put it online first. Mm-hmm. And that's I find that super fascinating, because on the Video Essay playlist, a lot of these works that are designated as video art are things that you can barely find online. We only have like excerpts of them, but your work is entirely available. So that leads to a very interesting question about, how you associate with the term artist or art, as far as like where you put your practice. So I wonder about that.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think in terms of accessibility is just something I'm thinking about. This film is for Black femmes. It's something I created kind of right when quarantine started, pre the uprising taking root in the way that it has. So I was just like, I'm trying to think about work that feels good on a soul level. And I've made work in the past that doesn't feel good on a soul level and is a lot more polemic. And so this is kind of, I think, an evolution in that thinking. In terms of like accessibility, so like, yeah, this is online, this is on Instagram. It's like, I'm down with that. I'm very new to like, thinking about the work. Like, I'm a Tumblr baby, so I'm very new to thinking about like this art world approach where it's like you only have you can only screen so many versions of the thing. And I also think that that's a direct reflection of how much I'm getting paid to make this work. Like, the policy on where you can access my things and like what is for the public might change when I actually have more representation. So shouts out to the world. But also I'd like to say like this film being involved in this program, and also just like my thinking on accessibility, like this day is actually marking something where it's like all my films will not be accessible. I'm actually going to pull the film that y'all had originally reached out to screen, Wet Look, right, in response to kind of in response to, it's an older film and we can talk a little bit more. I don't know how we're doing on time, but that actually is something where I'm pulling it not necessarily to make it harder for folks. Well, I'm making it harder for folks to see, but because I don't know that I like the ripple effect that it has in the world. So kind of.
We should definitely talk about that video and the issues of, re-traumatization that we had a conversation about, that you actually made us more sensitive to. But we also have one more guest waiting in the wings. So let's come back to that during the Q&A. So Professor Flowers is coming in the next block. We have 2 more videos that are found on YouTube. One by one of the most popular YouTube channels for the art of screenwriting, Lessons from the Screenplay. This video called Get Out, A New Perspective in Horror. Unfortunately, the creator, Michael Tucker, couldn't join us today, but this is a fantastic video that's really kind of the classic vein of like movie-based video essays. It's kind of how I started. And then Real Talk is Bread Tube Discussing Race Right by Professor Flowers, which is, it's amazing that YouTube has just grown so much that now you have video essays about YouTube that we're going to see. So we'll watch those, and then we'll invite Professor Flowers to speak with us.
Welcome back, audience, and welcome specifically to Professor Flowers. Your video essay, your YouTube video is so insightful. I'm really excited to engage in conversation with you. Your piece, Real Talk, is both incredibly well researched, but also deeply personal, and specifically as you recount your personal experiences on YouTube as a content creator. It's also the only video from today's screenings that feature the image of the creator within the video, which is a pretty cool distinction. And I think that really speaks to the structure of not just like YouTube videos, but also to the personal nature of Real Talk itself and of your work. So you discussed how you previously met with disdain for videos that have meaningfully addressed race previously. What has the reception to Real Talk been like since you released it? And how has your experience on YouTube shaped your voice as a creator?
Yeah, the response was really good, which I was actually surprised about. Like it's for me, for the size of my channel, that video blew up, and I was not expecting that. And so people, but I'm really happy because, again, in leftist spaces, I feel like leftists generally care about like ending racism, but there are a lot of pockets of leftist spaces that are white. And so there's a lot of people who like think racism is an issue, but don't necessarily know how to like engage with that. And so I think when I posted that video, a lot of people were like, oh yeah, like, you know, I have these more layered discussions about race on LeftTube. People responded being like, I haven't really thought of that because I have seen videos on race on LeftTube, but I guess they aren't as layered as you were pointing out in the video. So there was a really good response to that.
Yeah, no, honestly, I found your video before the playlist, even just being on YouTube, being like a Black girl on YouTube who was looking for other Black people on YouTube talking about issues that I cared about. And I forget how exactly it came across you, but also I feel like Real Talk is an incredible resource for finding other Black content creators on the platform if you maybe have not already been introduced to them. So I'm happy to hear that the reception to this one specifically has been not just more positive, but more nuanced and less full of trolls. My second question for you actually comes from our audience. So I wanted to remind everyone at home watching, if you have any questions, please email them to questions@opencitylondon.com, and we will try to get to them. So my question for you, Professor Flowers, is, and we're going to open this up to everyone eventually, but how do you feel about your work being presented in this context of the Black Lives Matter video essay playlist? And could you speak more broadly about the space between the creation and intent of a work and how a work ends up being received, interpreted, or presented and curated?
Can you actually clarify the last part where you said how something about like how work is like curated or interpreted?
Yeah, my understanding of the question would be how you the original intention of creating the video and how it relates to maybe this conversation that we're engaging in currently, and how the initial intention of creating Real Talk interacts with the fact that it ended up on this playlist eventually. You know, how, yeah.
That makes sense. Yeah, I made this video actually like before the protest happened, like very shortly before. And I think it's also why that video got more views, because people were like, oh, like we should be aware of race. Where's a video talking about race? Oh, here's a video talking about race. And, but I think, I think it's really still relevant in a way that it's on a playlist, like the Black Lives Matter playlist, because it's really, the goal is just like, specifically in leftist spaces, to try to talk about ending racism, because I think it's like a multiracial space where we can really work together. But I do think it was interesting that it was made before the protests, because I feel like now, before I made the video, I was like, yeah, there's not a lot of content. Like at the end of the day, my goal is to make a video on whiteness, and like what that is whiteness as a racial construct. And I was like, there is no way if I make a video about that, I will probably just get a flood of hatred. And if anyone really tries to make a video about it, it just won't go well, even though that's probably one of the most important issues to talk about with race. So that's why I started making this video, because I was like, we need to have these layered discussions about race. And for me, like, we really need to talk about whiteness. And like all of these videos were trying to build up to that. And it's kind of funny in some ways, because the protest happened, now that we're like in this, like, they're still happening, people are able to receive, people are kind of like, oh, okay, like there is a really big issue with racism and we have to talk about it. So I almost wonder if I really even needed to make that video, because the existence of the protests themselves was like a wake up call to so many people. Whereas like, yeah, race is a huge issue. So I'm so glad I made my video and said, let's have more nuanced conversations. But especially with the protests, it's like, I think that became very apparent anyways to so many people.
Mm-hmm. I'll say, speaking personally, I actually needed your video essay when I found it because of how it so clearly distilled the different types of work coming from different Black YouTubers and different YouTubers of color. So personally, very happy that you did make it, and also really enjoyed part 2 as well. I would invite our other guests, Jasmine and Zinga, to also answer the question about how you feel about your work being presented within this context. Either of you can answer.
All right, I'll dive in. Yeah, I'm really grateful. I love Professor Flowers. I loved your piece, and I think that's such a nice note to end on. And yeah, thank you for that. So I'm just grateful to be introduced to that work. And what I briefly acknowledged before is y'all had initially reached out to screen a film I made in 2015 called Wet Look, which, yeah, it was 2015. We were in a different place, a different time. And it's also interesting because I made that film and have screened it publicly closer to when it was created, like 2015, 2016. And the whole concept of it, it's called Wet Look. It's appropriated videos from YouTube where I'm taking videos off of these Wet Look playlists where it's girls being thrown into pools. And then I kind of connect these dots of like all these videos where you just almost see the girl thrown into the pool, and it kind of starts off more absurd. And then it just like the screams and the laughter just get more intense as the film goes on until you're seeing videos of like young Black people, young Black femmes being violated by police outside of pools, and like they can't even get to the water, and kind of a continuation and drawing parallels between that and trying to have an intersectional conversation around agency. And it also was like deliberately, at the time, in the context of YouTube, it's a troll, because if you look up Wet Look, like there are people who get off on these videos and, you know, people upload them not knowing that they're added to these playlists. It's just like, oh, a video of my friend getting thrown in the pool. And then it's part of like 100 of video playlists where it's just young, often underage girls being thrown into the water. And so for me, when I made it, it was kind of a troll, because if you're watching for that moment of seeing the girls submerged, you'll never get there. You will never see them in the water. And so I stand by the construction of that work, but right now it's just like, bro, we don't need any more Black violence against Black bodies, violence against bodies. I'm so beyond this conversation around, or like, I think that Professor Flowers, your film is a great, yeah, I think it articulates kind of this vibe I'm trying to get across, but it's like, just showing videos of Black people being traumatized has not led to us having more empathy. Like if you just look at the evolution from like Rodney King to here, everything, you know, like body cams, like that hasn't actually had an impact in our liberation in a way that I would like to see. So I think for me, the shift has been from being like, how do I exemplify that these things are happening, into like, okay, fuck that. How do I center Black folks, Black audiences? How do I prioritize people who aren't often considered in the construction of work? How do I prioritize their feelings? And getting other people on board is less of the point. So I think that's where I suggested screening the film Unlocked. And you see that evolution where it's like, okay, you can get something from this film if you're a white person. And it is definitely a suggestion to people who have logs, who are white. But ultimately the film is explicitly addressing Black femmes. And I just think it's interesting with Wet Look. When I first put out that film, like I was invited to present at a class in the New School, shouts out, that's my alma mater. I also don't, I don't owe them nothing, but I was invited to present the work, and I had done all this work to like get together materials, and I was screening that film, and the teacher had pushed back and was like, I think this is too triggering to show in a classroom environment, which is like, I was the Black student in these classroom environments, and I was triggered, like everyone can catch this smoke. And yeah, and just like people using that film too. Like I've had friends at parties like have weird intellectual debates like, oh, did you like Wet Look? And then someone being like, yeah, I liked Wet Look. And it's like, why did you like Wet Look? And it's like, it's a weird, if you like that film, there's a problem with you, is how I feel. So it's very much a horror film. So anyway, all of that is to say, the same day that y'all reached out to screen it, I also had another film festival reach out to screen that work. And I think it's just so interesting, the life force that project has had. And now it's like, I need it to die. It feels like the gender reveal party. Like I'm the creator of the gender reveal party and now the world is on fire. And I'm like, no, actually, fuck this. Let's talk about healing. Let's let recenter things. So I'm going to, I'm thinking through either like replacing that video altogether and it's just going to be like puppies running in a meadow, or pulling it down, privatizing it, trigger warning. But I do think like in this moment, I'm also like, I gotta scrub Wet Look from the internet until it can be screened in environments that contextualize that work a little better.
So we still want to hear from Professor Nzinga Kendall about how she feels about this question of her work being in the Black Lives Matter video playlist. But Nzinga, also, given what Jasmine just said about the educational context and the kind of sensitivities involved with showing particular types of content, and I wonder what your take is on that, and also what role video essays have in your teaching practice. So it's kind of multiple questions tied together.
I think in terms of being included on this playlist, in one sense, it was like, really flattering and an honor to be part of this group. In another sense, I was wondering how my work kind of fit in, because I guess I'm from a different generation and also aesthetic style. And it's neat to actually see some of the stuff that's going on YouTube. And Jasmine, before you had mentioned Tumblr, and then also just it helps me to widen my own understandings of how Blackness works and how Blackness kind of circulates amongst Black folks. And I think that's really important in terms of remembering how there is such diversity within Blackness, right? Blackness is not a monolith. So there's that. In terms of the, I guess I'm going to just read something by a Kenyan thinker named Kaguru Macharia. And it's kind of related to what both you, Jasmine, and you, Professor Flowers, were saying earlier. And it's just he says, I'm uninterested in investigating, documenting, theorizing, and inhabiting my own negation, Black negation. I am uninterested in remaining within the dynamics of oppression and resistance, oppression and agency as the dominant frames within which Black life is to be thought and theorized. I am uninterested in the brief glimpses of something called Black agency found in colonial archives. So I feel like that kind of philosophy guides the work that I want to do. And it's part of the reason why even in putting together the I Feel Therefore I Can Be Free, it was really important for me to have a generative conversation between Black women. And it's not a conversation about answering to white folks necessarily, although of course they exist in the piece, right? I talk about these two white men who were kind of the heads in the post-production. But it's also to complicate the notion, as I was saying before, of a kind of US-centered Blackness. I find it interesting also that, this is a London, UK-based film festival, and a lot of the content is centered in the US for this particular program, considering that there is an aggressive attack on Black life in the UK and in wider European spaces, right? So I guess all of that to say that in my teaching, I'm very aware of not thinking about Blackness as negation. So, for example, I'm teaching a class this semester on film history. And because it is this kind of weird COVID pandemic time, I was like, what happens if we do a film history that decenters Hollywood and Western European film? Like, what happens if we don't think about this through, like, if we're thinking about film history post-World War II, and what if we don't start with neorealism, right? Like, what happens if we start with a film like Ousmane Sembène's Camp de Thiaroye, right? Which is a World War II answer film, right? But even this week, I participated in the scholar strike, and I showed my students. I like switched everything, and I was like, okay, I'm going to show you Madeline Anderson's I Am Somebody and Sky Hapinka's Dislocation Blues, because they're both films about this ongoing struggle, right? And how Black and Indigenous struggles for themselves, right, are in constant, under constant attack by the state and police, right? And you can see that in both of their films. And so those films, in a way, could also be considered, well, they're both documentaries, right? But Sky Hapinka's film could be considered a kind of essayistic film, perhaps. And it used some of those techniques. And then I guess sorry, I've been running on, but the last thing that I'll say is I do offer video essay as an option for students. And I've been really excited by the kinds of works that students who choose to do that, what they put together. So, yeah.
Well, that's very gratifying to hear. But I mean, also, you pretty much answered your own question about why we selected your video, because just your account of your teaching practice just sounds like such a radical and necessary reframing of how we see film, how we see film as an experience, as a reflection of lives, which films should we pay attention to or need to be paid attention to. So, you know, your video essay really does make visible a protagonist and a film itself that, you know, hasn't been given its due. And the question of visibility kind of segues, I think, to this other audience question that was addressed to Professor Flowers. You know, as Sydney had mentioned, Professor Flowers, your video is the one where is the one video where the creator appears on screen. And this audience question is, your video essay affirms the discomfort I feel about the tone of carefully managed, humorous, ironic, and often self-deprecating performance that LeftTube seems to require of its makers. And yet, no level of nuance in comedic memes ever shields LeftTube makers from mass vitriol, particularly when it comes to queer and radicalized tubers. It's clear that LeftTubers put themselves in a very vulnerable position in order to serve and maintain subscribers and Patreon funders. They need, in an unseen audience that is equal parts welcoming and extremely hostile. And this reality often becomes a source of self-deprecating jokes. Is the pressure to put yourself on display and perform a palatable self endemic to the economy of YouTube? Can someone be a successful maker on YouTube and draw on their voice without centering themselves as a quote unquote brand? Or is this actually important to the genre? There's a lot to take in, but
yeah, I actually have noticed like with ContraPoints in her last video, she has like a lot of like jokes about how people don't like her and stuff like that because of the stuff that's happened. And it's interesting because, yeah, like you're really vulnerable on LeftTube because it's really easy to get canceled by like the people who watch it. And then it's also there's just like also people who are like right winger or conservative who are also can like verbally attack you. But I do think I I don't know. I think that you don't necessarily need, well, it's really hard because on YouTube, there's like branding and it's like a form of entertainment. So on LeftTube, it's really weird because like there are a lot of things coming from like, you know, I was reading this like journal article or something, and you're putting it into a form of entertainment. So you're taking something that's like scholarly a lot of times, or you're talking about Kant or something, and you're like, but you're trying to make it entertaining. So it's something that like, I think it's like something that's like that I've thought about a lot about like, I don't think you necessarily need to be self-deprecating, but I think on YouTube it's tricky because you have to be entertaining, well, maybe talking about something scholarly, or entertaining when talking about something heavy. And I think that this can be a double-edged sword because on one hand, it can draw people in, and there's a lot of people who aren't going to read scholarly articles. So you're like giving them a start to something. And then on the other hand, some information is just not going to translate perfectly into the form of entertainment.
Well, that's a very interesting tension between, and given that we have professional academic in our midst, and someone who has people who are engaged with the public as far as YouTube, and this question of like educational versus entertainment, and are these things exclusive, or how can they actually work together? This actually connects to one more question, which also connects to a question that I have. So let me see if I can phrase this succinctly. The question is, Kevin mentioned video art as perhaps distinct from the video essay, and there is a similar historical debate about criticism, whether criticism can rise to the level of art. Since you're working with the image, even though it is generally commentary analysis, do you think the video essay can or should be considered art? Okay, so that's another binary between, art versus criticism. And then a related thought that I have is the, let's just say the didactic, polemical, explanatory on the one hand, versus the open, the ambiguous, the poetic, the exploratory on the other. And I feel like with the selection that we've seen this evening, you can kind of delineate a spectrum of modes, but then also videos that combine these two modes between like explaining and exploring. So yeah, so we have these potential binaries that may or may not need to be disrupted, but at the same time give us a sense of what's at stake. So entertainment versus educational, art versus just something that's not art, criticism, and then explaining versus exploring. So I don't know how you would relate your own practices to these helpful or unhelpful binaries.
Yeah, I try to be like my goal is to ultimately be the perfect blend of everything, because to me, the most helpful stuff has been like something that's okay. So I don't know if any of you watch the Daily Show, or no, not the Daily Show. Last Week Tonight with Jon Stewart. There's like, it's totally entertainment, but then he'll also be like putting in like research that's like confirmed to be true, and that draws in millions of people. And so for me, like, I want to, it's definitely not something that you should do for school, but it's, as far as like trying to reach as much people as possible and getting ideas out there, I think there's like a really amazing blend of like something that's engaging your average person, and something that's sorry, I don't have time, so I'm kind of being like frantic, but so I think there's like this really important balance between, and then like you're talking about like explaining versus exploring, and yeah, I'm not really sure how to necessarily draw the line between those things, but I do think like the idea of like entertainment versus like educational is something that can be blended together at times. I don't know. I'm kind of all over the place. Yeah.
I'd agree too. Like, I feel like the work that I do straddles all of that. And like in my video essay work for it to really take advantage of the audiovisual form to make an object that, like, you know, in some ways like aesthetically pleasing, while still being poetic, perhaps, exploratory and explanatory, but also leaving some gaps. And I do those gaps a lot with like the silences and the black screens and the kind of jump cuts. So yeah, that's my answer.
Yeah, I think I had the most visceral reaction to the phrase explaining versus exploring. That was generative for me. And I feel like those words can define the distinction of like audience, you know, like if I'm explaining something, then that feels like I'm an other trying to like relay an experience to people who don't have that. So I don't think I'm interested in explaining, but exploring, like that feels like something you do in good company, whether that's like through conversation, you're exploring ideas or exploring like if you feel there's a certain safety implied with exploration, I feel like, and just like, yeah, groundedness. So I think I'm more interested in the exploration aspect of that. Yeah. And then in terms of like the whole can critique be I'm not the category person, so I'm gonna be like, yes, of course it can. Why not? Like I think like, but also like I do think that there are critics, Black critics who's I think like the way that they frame their ideas and synthesize things like that is deeply artful and has influenced myself and I'm sure many other artists in the world. And like that, just like, you know, there are many, a film can influence me, and a critique of a film can influence me. And I would say in some ways critiques have echoed longer in my head and have kind of, I think it's useful and that is inherently a form of art. So.
Well, just actually to go back to Nzinga, like, does poetics, you know, what role does poetics have in pedagogy and academia? Is another way of thinking about it, because maybe I'm just playing too much to stereotypes about what academia is supposed to be. But what would your take be on that?
I feel like that's a much longer in-depth conversation. But yeah, I'm gonna kind of weave my way out of that question, if that's okay. We can talk about that some other time. I'm happy to.
In terms of also pushing back on labels, I'm like, yeah, what is academia supposed to be? Like, it's not working. Like, the fact that we're having this film screening, like, whatever it is, like, is not working and is not serving everybody. So, yeah, I think, yeah.
Or the cynical view could be, it is working, right? Yeah. For certain folks.
I will say this, throughout the pandemic specifically, I found that the content I've been watching has been less narrative, and I've felt myself being more drawn to video essays on Vimeo and on YouTube. And I think it may have to do with like the isolation of the moment and how feeling like someone is communicating to you specifically through your screen, like watching a video essay or a YouTube video and feeling like unconsciously even that you're in conversation with someone or that someone's talking to you, as opposed to sitting on the couch and watching a movie and in the full knowledge of you being there by yourself. So I feel like both, I think the video essay or video art or this videographic medium that we all happen to be in feels like it doesn't have to be. I think it can be all of those things at once. Or at the very least, I would like to believe that I would like my work to be all of those things at once. I feel like it's most effective that way, potentially, in reaching a broader audience. And I also feel like, to that point, I personally like to use scholarship to substantiate maybe like an artistic or emotional point I want to convey. And I want to use art to keep people engaged. I want to use poetry to keep people engaged. And I want to keep people engaged because I deeply care about what it is that I'm talking about. So in that regard, I agree on the potential lack of labels. And finally, as it connects to the playlist, that was a question that came up really early in our discussions between myself, Will, and Kevin, because it's called the Black Lives Matter video essay playlist because at its inception, to my knowledge, it was about compiling video essays as we had perceived them, as a means of like serving the field that we're all in, which is film studies. And just in the act of receiving so many different types of videos that we couldn't necessarily call video essays, but knew that potentially belonged on this list, the broadening, like the loosening of the labels allowed for this playlist to encompass all of our art at once. And I think that's really beautiful. And I think it also has potential to meet different people where they're at.
This was a very necessary and useful conversation because admittedly that playlist is huge and I think people when they first see it are a little intimidated and they're not sure how to navigate it. And just having this conversation, I really wish we could have conversations like this on a more regular basis where you can have each of you account for your work and give it a richer context is incredibly valuable. And I wish there was an easier way to make that available within the playlist itself. Like we need to have little hovering hypertext or maybe a link to this conversation if we can make it available as an archive. Will, I think you're muted.
Oh, okay.
You kind of sound like a robot. That might just be me. I'm into it. We can understand you, but it is very distorted.
Someone keeps muting me and unmuting.
Oh, you're good now. You're good now.
My screen's like flashing. Anyway, no, sorry. I just wanted to piggyback of what Kevin said. This notion of categories. As we were gathering videos, the categories were a way to make the list more digestible because at the end of the day, we want people to use this list as a resource and to actually watch the videos. And I feel like the scariest thing is to just see like a list of links and to then it's of use to no one. And so at the beginning of our little intro to the playlist, we say if you disagree with our categorization, reach out. Cause we honestly aren't it's definitely not, we don't have a religious devotion to the categories in any form. And Claire, it was really interesting for me to hear you cite Last Week Tonight and The Daily Show because Kevin, Cindy, and I have this really long email thread where we're just trying to figure out what the hell this list is. And Kevin actually raised this question of could clips from The Daily Show be on this list? And we don't need to rehash it, argue now, but there's definitely a kinship between The Daily Show and something else. And one of the questions that we've reckoned with and that I firmly believe is that something like The Daily Show doesn't need more visibility. So maybe it doesn't need to be on this list, right? We're not doing Trevor Noah any favors. And if anything, it's just going to dilute the list and make it harder for other works to be seen. So in the spirit of kind of the title of this event, which is Seen and Heard, and also selections, meaning that we hope that people will go to videoessay.com/Black Lives Matter and look at other lists. I'm wondering if we could tie it back to just getting your work out there and seen. And what are some of the, I guess we could have a two-part question. What are some of the barriers that you find to getting your work out there and shown to people? But also if there's someone else who's trying to get their work out there, what are maybe some tips that you would provide? And maybe Claire, we could, if I could turn that question over to you first, and then anyone else can chime in to answer.
Yeah, for me, one of the biggest barriers is YouTube itself, because on every other social media platform, it's really easy to get followers. And so when I started YouTube, a lot of YouTubers start off having 10 views, and it's like that for a long time. And then I realized that Twitter, for some reason, is where it's at for a lot of political YouTuber stuff. And so I grew my Twitter a bit, I think to 1,000 followers. Is that what we call on Twitter? 1,000 people. And from there, when I posted my video, I followed a bunch of YouTubers that I liked, and they saw it on Twitter, and that was what allowed it to be viewed. So I think just that's a very practical thing. I'm not sure if that's quite where your question was directed, but very practically, YouTube, for whatever reason, as a rough platform to get started on as opposed to others. So I basically use other forms of social media to promote my YouTube channel, and that helped a lot.
Absolutely. No, I wasn't looking for anything in particular, but that makes sense. Jasmine, if you want to jump in there, and then I think, and Ngeza, but we are running up against the clock here.
I would say, specifically speaking to other Black folks, a lot of my first screenings were screenings I curated myself with my partner, Yulen. We did the Afrofuturism Film Festival in 2015. And so I think, big upping other people and building the network that way. And then I also just a larger, I could spiral on this forever, and it's definitely reflected in the work, but kind of related to the question that was thrown at Professor Flowers earlier around these YouTubers and having to essentially brand and commodify oneself in order to reach an audience. And it just made me think of a few things. One, you were talking about when you got 1,000 followers, and I remember seeing the study years ago of the tipping point. If you can just get 1,000 followers, then anything you post can go viral. And so that was burned in my head. And then also just another article of artists who use the word "me" more they have more opportunity. They have bigger platforms, bigger visibility. So the more that you integrate yourself and commodify yourself, the more likely people will take interest in the work that you make, which is a nightmare. And also is complicated because I very much believe too in we haven't seen enough depictions and representations of Black queer folks. And so I want to see people like me and Black folks on screen, but at the same time, we're in we're in the age of social media. And frankly, just to speak very clear-eyed about it and also grossly about it for other content creators, I feel as a Black filmmaker, I have two paths that have been set out or that I've seen work. And there's the Hollywood path of climb your way up the ladder, which I'm not. That's going to take way too long. I'm not a white boy. We ain't doing that. And then there's the art path and the influencer path where you kind of, you do your thing and you have your channel and you look cute and then you make good work. And sometimes you don't make good work and you just look cute, and sometimes you make good work not that cute. And, there's a million combinations. But for me, frankly, it's I'd say the agency that social media provides is more appealing to me than the limitations of Hollywood. So that's where my head's at.
And then Nzinga, real quick, just to wrap us up here, I would just be very curious to hear, as an academic, I'm sure your video, it's going to reach people beyond perhaps someone who might read a written essay that you would write in an academic journal and reach people who are non-academics. And I would just be curious, is that something that comes into your mind a little bit as you're making the piece, and does that kind of shape how you prepare it to enter into the void of the internet?
I mean, I feel in a way that video essay is not overly academic, if we want to call it that. And it's funny because I'm not very on social media, and I in terms of marketing yourself and getting eyes on your production, it's something that I have the luxury of not being concerned about because I do have a job, right? My job isn't to create art or to, whatever. But I think in terms of distribution, something that sticks with me happened at the New Negress Black Women's Film Conference that's going on right now. And the other night, there was a conversation with Zainabu Irene Davis, who's a really amazing filmmaker. And she went through a kind of history of Black folks making films and in ways that were not mainstream and are not mainstream, but still there are these circuits where Black folks speak to each other and make sure that works get seen, kind of, Jasmine, what you were saying, outside of the Hollywood circuit, or just ways that we can be creative in having our creative expression be accompanied with these kinds of discussions that, Kevin, you were talking about, before. I think that stuff is still important. Yeah, that's all I have to say.
All right, we are out of time, unfortunately, but this has been a very rich and fulfilling conversation, just speaking for myself. And I'm so grateful that we had this time together. So I want to thank Nzinga, Jasmine, Claire, for your time, for your thoughts, for your work. Thank you for being part of our work. And again, the URL, Will, I believe, is thevideoessay.com/Black Lives Matter playlist. Yeah. And no. All right. Are you going to correct me then?
thevideoessay.com/Black Lives Matter.
Okay. So yes, thank you, everyone. Hope you enjoy the rest of the Open City Documentary Festival. There are many other screenings and events coming up in the next several days. But for now, we wish you all a very pleasant evening. I think it is evening everywhere now and or late afternoon. And see you around. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, everyone. This has been great.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Bye.